Folks, hey, congratulations for the hard book of Acursian coming out soon. Oh, actually, it is out.
It is out, yes.
Yes, yay to us. Woohoo!
Hurrah.
So let's strike it back to the beginning. Where did the idea of Acursian actually came from? Because it's been a few years, right?
Yes. I think it started at a con, and there was probably a little alcohol and sweets involved. I'm not sure. But it started at Comic-Con, I think in San Diego a few years ago. And John had worked with Erika before on Attack of the Show. And that's how I got to know her. And we were like, let's just do something. And we both loved Celtic mythology. And I think we just started spitballing all these ideas. And, you know, with John and I, with our Scottish background and being born and raised over there, it just made sense that we take an iconic figure like Bonnie Prince Charlie and do something with him.
And Carole wanted to torture John in the process.
Yes.
Which,
Oh, really?
Which was evident.
Yeah.
So when you folks actually approached on basically writing the story, how did you want to basically get it all started? So you started with the Scottish lore, the Celtic lore, or you basically created a fictional character of Charles?
Well, we started with a story of wanting to give me a job in the future, which would be putting me in a comic book.
Right.
That eventually, when it would become either a TV series or a movie, that I would get employed to play the character. So that was the modus operandi behind it. But the fact that the funny bit, well, the part of it that when we were doing Attack of the Show at the con, and when it all kind of, our paths all crossed. Carole and Erika were drinking. I was working.
Wait a minute. Don't get me in trouble now.
No. Erika wasn't drinking. Carole was.
All right.
Only Carole.
And we, the decision kind of because we then, as we got to know each other better, we also realized that we had this love of Celtic lore and mythology. And, obviously, like Carole said, our background being Scottish and, and Erika loves Ireland and all that coming together. We just thought there has to be some kind of story here. And Carole and I have always been fascinated. I used to do burnt suppers with my mom and dad and sing. Carole used to stand on the sidelines and watch because she's tone deaf. It was that whole thing. We knew there had to be a story somewhere within the realm of all because some people have taken things like certain characters. I won't name them because I don't want to naff anybody off, but they've taken characters and painted their faces and done certain things that they haven't really kind of honored part of the story. They've obviously fictionalized it. So we thought, well, we can fictionalize something to do with with Prince Charlie and things that we love about Scotland and the Celts and everything. And that's just how it grew. Like our relationships together grew. It just started to expand.
Yeah. And when we started to dive into the story of it all, we wanted to start with a decidedly imperfect character. Someone who... Which
is John.
Okay.
Right?
No, not going there.
Now it's my turn. My turn.
There's always payback.
There he is.
Someone who didn't, this is now everything I'm going to say is going to get attributed to John. Someone who really took his life for granted, and took all the things he had for granted. And especially this newborn kid and all that kind of stuff. And then in one day when it's just suddenly gone and he has to figure out, first it's suddenly gone and he can't really understand what's really happening. And then over the arc of the story, he realizes what he's lost and that he doesn't think he's going to be able to get it back unless he sort of ends this.
Yeah, but we have to add that before we pitched it to, we pitched it to Legendary. They loved it. They loved having John starring in it, but they kept saying, you got to torture him more. You got to torture him more. So so the whole first chapter, I think, is, you know, poor Charlie just everything happens to him. And so we knew I know how much John loves cars. So for me, the ultimate thing was in those opening scenes that his car gets wrecked, things fall off his car, he gets hit in he gets hit in the crotch, and then birds just shit all over him. It was like the highlight of my creative moment.
Yeah.
And anytime anybody spends time at my house, they always have freedom to use the cars, but there are strict rules to be involved.
I didn't know we could use them.
But yeah, so all that stuff that happens to him, you know, is relevant. But the one thing I know, Erika and Carole and myself, and whenever we've started a project, there's always the one question that you answer, and there's other stories that we have. Sorry, questions you ask, and like for instance, in the Hollow Earth book for Carole and I, it was what would be your superpower? In this, for all three of us, it was what happens if on one day you wake up and your entire life falls apart? Where do you go?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And plus we wanted to have some really badass goddesses, and Celtic lore has some badass goddesses. So
yeah, tell us more about the Celtic lore that you actually utilize, because you know, I'm not Scottish, I'm not Celtic, obviously, but you know, I've heard of the Fates, I've heard of, you know, harpies and, you know, some of these creatures. So what did you want to basically? How much of the Celtic lore did you want to use?
Well, I think when you use stories like that readers are going to have some iconic parts to them, and readers are going to say, okay, this is familiar to me. As writers, that's just a jumping off point. So we knew and so I think for us it started with the Scottish play. I'm assuming we can say that on.
Just don't.
No, we can't. Not even on Zoom.
Just don't.
Just don't even.
Not in fucking 2020. Don't mention it.
All right. So it started with a scene in Shakespeare, right? In the Scottish play that we shall not name, with, you know, the three witches. And then we thought, and from there it morphed to something else. And then we just started figuring out, okay, so these three women are going to just, you know, they want something from Charlie. And so I think the world building came from that one scene for us. Erika, yeah?
Yeah, and I think the inspirations for everything, whether it's going in and out of the Isle of Shadows and all of the textures and the harpies and all the different iconic elements, Biera, the names themselves, Alba, there are things that we sort of stole from. It's not like we took the Children of Lear, or we took a legend and rewrote that legend. We cherry picked little things and
borrowed
it all together,
right?
And made something original.
We borrowed and emulated.
Yes, it's an homage.
It's an homage, right? Right.
But the one thing, Gig, is when you and we all know this, when we're creating different worlds, whether it be your, you know, for a book, television, movie, you have to create a world that the fans and also the people who are watching it or reading it have to believe in. And also, if there's an element, one thing that I was taught early on in my career, familiarity. I can't say the word familiarity. Say it.
Familiarity.
Familiarity breeds loyalty. So if you can put something in the world that you're creating that they're familiar with, or they can recognize, or, oh, what's that? I'll look it up. You know, everything from, you know, from what Erika and Carole just said, but even down to the minutia of, you know, a ski and do, the knife or the dagger. That's where that dagger came from something I wear in my kilt and every other Scotsman wears in his kilt. So if there's a familiarity there, I said it, you can, people will be able to latch on, and the world doesn't become then too confusing for them. It becomes something that they want to go learn more about.
Well, I think the Brawny Prince too. I mean, Carole in particular did a ton of research in making sure we got the inn that he was in right, and making sure the landscape was, we worked very hard with the artist and got him a lot of pictures and made sure all those little pieces, Flora MacDonald and all the things that were actually a part of the original story and the Battle of Culloden, and all of that felt, we fictionalized it clearly, but felt, it was true to the real. So if somebody goes to look all those bits up,
it is real.
It's real.
Yeah, and John, I don't know, you might remember, we actually, you and I and Scott had lunch or dinner, I can't remember which one, in that inn, and I think we took a bunch of pictures outside of it and taunted Erika, who wasn't with us.
Yes.
Yeah.
You were on book tour.
We were on a book tour for something.
Yeah.
I think it was a book tour for Conjurer, I think.
Right.
Yeah. Did I ever give you the Flora MacDonald book, Carole, the small one, or memoir?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, well.
Well, there's my Christmas present.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, no, it's sitting here. I think it might be amongst my books because it's an
I
original.
could see you looking over there, and I'm thinking,
No, I'm looking over and thinking, where is that Flora MacDonald book that I got? And it's like the first publication of it. It's very old and very rickety.
just like you.
Oh.
Yeah,
We
no,
don't like Gig. And ask some more questions. You got to butt in because
you gotta just butt in, Gig, or we're gonna.
No, I'm enjoying your conversations. So when you guys actually sat down to write the story, did you write it like sort of like a novel, or did you try to write it sort of like a script format?
It was a script. We wrote it originally. We started out with banging out a pilot for it. That Carole and I
for television.
Yeah, for television. And in that, I was working with Legendary on something else, and I had been talking to Robert Napton, who's a huge fan of John's and a huge fan of all things, Doctor Who and all things Scottish too. And so he was like, well, let's take it in and talk to Legendary and see what they think of the idea. And it was a great meeting. It was so much fun, and it just worked out to go that way first, and see what we could do with it as a comic, as a graphic novel.
It's still a brilliant pilot.
Yes, I think so.
It's also because a lot of things are, Walking Dead, Hellboy. I want to say Hellboy. Am I correct saying Hellboy? Things like, like the God and Godzilla, all those different things have come from graphic novels that are, they started as graphic novels. So I get, if anything, if Legendary, didn't want to run with it with the TV aspect of it, and they wanted us to get the world's, get the world formed, create the universe, you know what I mean? The universe they live in and the story, and then they would have something solid that they could then build on rather than just having one script. So we were all happy to go down that route.
Yeah.
No, it's just because when I actually read it, it felt like it was like a television show. It felt like there was a bigger universe out there that you guys could have done a lot more.
Well, it's funny you say that, Gig. Having somebody who's been involved in television for 34 years, and Erika's in television, and Carole's been writing and doing scripts and all sorts of stuff. There you go.
Yeah.
No, but listen, you'd be dumb, and I don't mean this in a condescending way at all. You'd be silly not to write or do anything now that you didn't have the aspiration or the idea that it would end up on a screen somewhere or in the future. And, if we go even to, other stuff that's been written, Harry Potter, when she wrote the first books, you read them, they were clearly merchandising. Everything was in there, as much as people don't want to admit that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think when we were writing, one of the things, usually Erika and I would just bang out a draft, and then John would look at it and throw in his, what he thought and so on. But the three of us, sometimes Erika was the one that would have to kind of rein us in, because, we'd go, talking about having other worlds, you know, there's a couple of scenes that, without giving too much away, there is some time travel-ish things in this, funnily enough. And there were a couple of times where you know, Erika would say, let's save this. Let's just save this.
Yeah.
And go down this way with this. So I think we were a good team that way.
It was hard when you have to fit, when you have a finite page count and you don't have a series that you know is going to be ongoing right away. So the story that there were a lot of the things we could get into it, but a lot of things we've got saved. I mean, you know, there's not just time travel, there's also alternate universes.
Right.
I mean, there's such a, the world can go in any direction that you really want it to go, which is the fun of it all. So.
Well, then I guess the easy question to ask is there more than this for Charles Stewart? Do you guys have more than this, or is this actually?
You'll just have to wait and see. Of course, if they ask for more, we will, you know, have
happy
more.
To do it.
It's happy to do it. It's just, you know, it's the question of, I know the ideas are there, but it's a question of then again refining the ideas and making them into what would be the continuing story of Charlie Stewart. And also, you know, it might not be Charlie that might be the focus. It might go off somewhere else.
Yeah.
It might be, and that's the kind of thing, the beauty of when you have these kind of stories. And I tell this little story of my sister who rang me at 2:00 in the morning crying, you know, and distraught. And she said, "I've killed him." And I said, "What the fuck do you mean you've killed him?" She said, "I've killed him." And I said, "You've killed your husband, Kevin?" And she goes, "No, not Kevin." And this is another character in her book. She said, "I killed Solon. I killed him. I had to. And I'm so devastated." I said, "Why are you devastated? He's a character in the book." And she went, "Because I was in love with him." I'm like, "Put the Chardonnay down. Call me in the morning and we'll talk about it." So you don't know which way it's going to go. And also, you know, people forget that when, you know, people are writing the characters and living the characters in their head and also on the page, they tend to go sometimes the way that the writers don't think they're going to go, if that makes sense. So the future of this, yes, it could be about Charlie Stewart, but it could also be about someone else. And I don't want to say anything, but it could be about another character in there that we just go into their world and see what happens.
And there's also a possibility that some characters don't stay dead, right?
Oh, that's always the case.
Definitely.
Nobody's ever dead.
Nobody's
Right.
In comics and science fiction, nobody's ever dead.
Ever.
And I can attest to that.
Absolutely.
So is basically you know, television or possibly animation still on the books for something like this?
Oh yeah.
It's all,
in fact, go ahead, John.
No, go on.
Well, I think John's been busy in some other universes for a little while, so that's coming up. And but I think we've brainstormed a little bit about next steps now that we have this out there. Well, first of all, we want everybody to read it, right? We want everybody to read it and enjoy it, and that's really the primary goal right now for the next few months. But we're hoping that we can take some next steps and see it going forward somewhere else.
It's just it's also about pitching, and pitching at the moment is very difficult.
Yeah.
Because you have to pitch. I'm a firm believer in being in the room, and to quote Hamilton, being in the room where it happened. But the fact of the matter, when you have to do pitch meetings on a Zoom, and I say this with all due respect, but we did one recently, and I actually watched one of the guys just do this the whole time.
Oh.
Yeah.
And it was like, why are you bothering? So for me, because if I were in the room, I would say, "Can you put your phone down, please?" And that would be it. But on Zoom, you don't really know that's all going on. The fact of the matter, it's difficult to do pitch meetings on something like this. And hopefully when we get back to some sense of normality, we can all go in and pitch it, because our energies together and us being together, as you can tell about the passion that we have behind it, talking about it, it really it bleeds into other people when we do it in a room with them. So hopefully, fingers crossed, in the future, it will pop on the screen.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, for my 2 cents, knock on wood, I really hope that you guys do some more of this, because I have to admit it, your characters are actually very likable.
Oh.
Every single one of them, dead or not. You know? I really hope you actually come up with more, whether it's another comic property or going into different mediums. So once again, congratulations for Acursian. And hey, you know what? Thank you for speaking with me. You guys are a delightful bunch.
Thank
We
you.
think so.
Thanks, Gig.
Thank you, Greg.
Cheers.
Cheers.